My son-in-law called my late wife's wedding ring a lazy asset at my own dinner table. He convinced my daughter to sell it behind my back to fund his next big deal. That deal, I discovered, was a secret family he had hidden 2 hours away. He thought I was just a sad old man, a relic from a bygone era, but he forgot that I was a watchmaker. I've spent my life taking things apart, piece by piece, until all their secrets are exposed. And at their 5th anniversary party, I showed everyone exactly how his perfect life was a lie, gear by broken, rusted gear. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you are listening from in the comments. The smell of roast chicken filled my small dining room, a scent that always reminded me of Sunday dinners with Eleanor. Now, it was just me, my daughter Clara, and her husband Marcus. He sat across from me, his perfectly tailored shirt gleaming under the low light, a stark contrast to my own worn flannel. He was a financial advisor, and he never let you forget it. Everything, to Marcus, was a number, a calculation, a potential for profit or loss, even my grief. "The market's volatile, Arthur," he said, swirling the red wine in his glass. "But in chaos, there's opportunity. The key is to be liquid. You can't have your capital sitting idle." I just nodded, pushing a piece of chicken around my plate. I knew this wasn't just small talk. With Marcus, it never was. He was laying the groundwork for something. Clara watched him with an adoring gaze, the same look her mother used to give me. The thought sent a sharp pang through my chest. "Take this house, for example," he continued, gesturing around the room with his wine glass. "It's prime real estate, but you're living on a gold mine. A reverse mortgage could free up incredible equity." "I'm fine, Marcus," I said, my voice tight. "The house is paid for. I have my pension." "Oh, we know, Dad," Clara chimed in, her voice bright and placating. "Marcus is just always thinking about the future, about security, about legacy." Legacy. That was the word he'd been using for months. He'd weaponized it. He glanced at the mantelpiece, where a photo of Eleanor and I on our wedding day sat in a silver frame. His eyes then darted to my daughter's hand, where she wore a simple gold band, and then to the empty space on her other hand, Eleanor's engagement ring. Clara had taken it off to help me with the dishes, leaving it on the small porcelain tray by the sink. "Speaking of legacy," Marcus said, his voice dropping to a confidential, persuasive tone, "Eleanor was a brilliant woman, practical. She would have wanted her assets to be working for the family, not just sitting in a box." His gaze was cold and direct. "That ring Clara has, it's a beautiful piece of history. But sentiment doesn't compound, Arthur. It's a lazy asset. A lazy asset." The words hit me like a physical blow. The ring I sold my first car to buy, the symbol of 40 years of marriage, of love and struggle and laughter and tears, was a lazy asset. I looked at Clara, expecting her to be horrified, to defend her mother's memory. Instead, she looked thoughtful, nodding slightly, as if Marcus had just revealed a profound financial truth. "He has a point, Dad," she said softly. "It's just sitting there. We had it appraised for insurance, remember? That money could be the down payment on our dream house. It could be a future for your grandchildren." I put my fork down, my appetite gone. The roast chicken in my stomach had turned to stone. "It's not money, Clara. It's your mother." "It can be both," Marcus interjected, his voice smooth as oil. "We honor her memory by using her gifts to build a better future. It's the smart play. It's what she would have wanted." I pushed my chair back from the table, the legs scraping against the hardwood floor. "The ring is not for sale. This conversation is over." The air in the room grew thick with tension. Clara's face fell, her eyes welling with tears of frustration. Marcus's charming facade cracked, revealing a flicker of cold, hard anger. He saw me not as a father-in-law, but an obstacle to his profit. They left soon after, the half-eaten dinner a testament to the fractured peace. I went to the sink to clean up, my hands shaking with a rage I hadn't felt in years. I picked up Eleanor's ring from the porcelain tray, its diamond catching the light, a tiny, defiant star in the dimly lit kitchen. I walked down to my workshop in the basement, the one place that was truly mine. I opened my heavy steel safe and placed the ring inside its velvet box. Then, with a heavy heart, I did the same with the rest of her jewelry, the pearls, the locket, the sapphire earrings. I was locking her away, not for safekeeping, but to protect her from the vultures in her own family. The next few days were quiet, too quiet. Clara didn't call. On Thursday, a wave of guilt washed over me. Had I been too harsh? She's my only child. I decided to call her, to try and mend the bridge I had burned. "Dad," she answered, her voice unnaturally cheerful. "I was just thinking about you. Listen, Marcus and I are heading out of town for the weekend, a little getaway. But I wanted to ask, could you water my plants on Saturday?" The request was so normal, so mundane, that I felt a surge of relief. "Of course, sweetheart." On Saturday, I let myself into their pristine modern condo. It was cold and impersonal, more like a showroom than a home. I watered the row of identical succulents on the windowsill and was about to leave when I saw it. On the small table by the door, where they left their keys, was a small, square business card. Julian Croft, Fine Jewelry and Estate Appraisals. It was the man who had valued Eleanor's jewelry. Tucked beneath it was a receipt. My blood ran cold as I picked it up. It was a consignment agreement dated 2 days ago. Listed on it was one item: vintage 2.5-carat old mine-cut diamond ring. My breath caught in my throat. I raced home, my heart hammering against my ribs. I stumbled down the stairs to my workshop, my fingers fumbling with the combination to the safe. I threw open the heavy door. The jewelry box was there, just as I'd left it. But when I lifted the lid, a strangled gasp escaped my lips. The velvet slot where her engagement ring should have been was empty. A cold, gaping wound stared back at me. They hadn't just argued with me. They had waited for me to leave, used the key I'd given them for emergencies, and stolen it from the one place I thought it was safe. I stood there, frozen in the cold basement air, the scale of their betrayal washing over me. But as I stared at the empty slot, my watchmaker's eye caught something else. A tiny, almost invisible scratch on the safe's inner hinge that wasn't there before. And wedged deep inside it, a single long strand of dark, curly hair. It wasn't Clara's. That single strand of dark hair was a detail that didn't fit, a gear in the wrong place. Clara's hair was blonde, straight as a pin, just like her mother's. This was something else, an anomaly in a crime I thought I already understood. My mind reeled. Had they hired someone, a professional, to crack the safe so their own hands would be clean? The thought was chilling. It elevated their betrayal from a desperate, greedy act to something premeditated and cold-blooded. My first impulse was to call Clara and unleash a torrent of rage. But I stopped myself, my hand hovering over the phone. A direct confrontation would only be met with a wall of denial and Marcus's slick, pre-rehearsed excuses. He would twist it, make me sound like a paranoid old man, and Clara would believe him. She always did. No, if I was going to get to the truth, I couldn't rely on them. I had to follow the evidence. The watchmaker in me took over, pushing the grieving father aside. The first step was to understand the transaction. I drove downtown to the address on the receipt, the name Julian Croft burning in my mind. His shop wasn't a glitzy showroom, but a discreet, by-appointment-only office on the 7th floor of an old Art Deco building. When I walked in, Mr. Croft himself, a small, precise man I remembered from the appraisal, looked up from his work with an expression of mild surprise. "Mr. Woods," he said, his voice as polished as the gems under his loupe, "an unexpected pleasure. How can I help you?" I placed the consignment receipt on his glass countertop. "I believe there has been a mistake. This ring belongs to me. It was taken from my home without my permission." Croft's professional calm didn't waver. He examined the receipt. "Ah, yes, the thorn ring, a magnificent piece. Your daughter and son-in-law were here 2 days ago. They were quite clear that you had a change of heart, that you wanted to use the funds to help them with a down payment on a house." He gave me a sympathetic look, a generous gesture. "It was not a gesture," I said, my voice low and hard. "It was a theft. I want the ring back." He sighed, leaning back in his chair. "I'm afraid that's not possible. The ring has already been sold. I had a private collector who had been looking for a stone of that exact cut and quality for months. The transaction was finalized yesterday afternoon." Sold. The word felt like a death sentence. It was gone. Forever. "Sold to whom?" "Client confidentiality forbids me from saying," he said smoothly. "However, I can assure you the payment was processed. Your son-in-law requested the funds be wired directly from the sale. He said it was for a time-sensitive investment, and he didn't want to waste a day." My mind seized on that detail. He hadn't even waited for the money to hit his own account. He had it sent directly somewhere else. A wire transfer. To where? Again, I'm not at liberty to. "This is a police matter," I interrupted, my voice ringing with an authority that surprised even me. "This ring was stolen from a locked safe in my private residence. You are now in possession of stolen goods, and you have facilitated the transfer of funds from a criminal transaction. You can either provide me with the details of that wire transfer, or my next stop is the police station across the street. And I assure you, a public investigation into your discreet business practices will be far more damaging than breaking one client's confidentiality, especially a client who is a thief." I watched the calculation happen behind his eyes. He weighed the inconvenience against the potential scandal. After a long, tense moment, he let out a defeated breath and turned to his computer. He printed a single sheet of paper and pushed it across the counter. It was a copy of the wire transfer confirmation. My eyes scanned the page, my heart pounding. The amount was $65,000. The sender was Julian Croft. The recipient was not a bank or an investment firm. It was a woman named Sophie Dubois, with an address in a small town called Northwood, 2 hours away. Sophie Dubois. The name meant nothing to me. But as I stared at it, a cold certainty washed over me. This was the source of the dark hair in my safe. This was the reason for the desperate theft. This wasn't about a down payment on a house for Clara. This was a payoff. This was for her. I folded the paper and put it in my pocket. "One more thing," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "The woman who was with them, did she have dark, curly hair?" Croft looked confused. "Mr. Thorne was with his wife, Clara. She's blonde. They were the only two here." The new information hit me like a splash of cold water. So the hair didn't belong to an accomplice who was there that day. It meant the lock had been picked before. It meant someone else had been in my house, in my workshop, near my safe. Who? When? The mystery was deepening, the threads tangling in ways I couldn't yet comprehend. I walked out of that office with more questions than answers, but with a new, terrifying focus. My target was no longer just Marcus. It was a ghost named Sophie Dubois. My wife's ring was gone, but I would be damned if I let them get away with why it was taken. I was going to find out who this woman was, and I was going to unravel the entire rotten tapestry of Marcus's lies, one thread at a time. The first thread was a 2-hour drive north.
Before heading to Northwood, I did something I hadn't done in a year. I went into Eleanor's closet. I needed to feel close to her, to draw strength from her memory. As I ran my hand over her dresses, my fingers brushed against a small wooden box tucked away on a high shelf. I opened it. Inside were old letters, photos, and a small leather-bound diary from the year before she got sick. I flipped to the last entry. Her familiar handwriting was shaky, but the words were clear. Marcus brought a friend from work over today, a sweet girl named Sophie. She has the most beautiful dark curly hair. He's helping her with some financial trouble. The diary entry was a ghost from the past, a voice from the grave that changed everything. My wife had met her. This wasn't some recent affair. This was a connection that went back years. Marcus had brought this woman, his secret, into my home while my wife was still alive. He had paraded her in front of Eleanor, disguised as a colleague in need, a charity case. The audacity, the sheer, calculated deceit of it was breathtaking. He hadn't just betrayed Clara. He had betrayed Eleanor's trust, her kindness. The dark hair in the safe suddenly made a horrifying kind of sense. Sophie had been here before. She knew the layout of the house. She had been in my workshop. My grief morphed into a cold, diamond-hard fury. This was no longer just about a stolen ring. This was about defending my wife's memory from the man who had defiled it with his lies. The trip to Northwood was no longer just an investigation. It was a pilgrimage to the heart of his betrayal. The town was a portrait of small-town America, all charming storefronts and manicured lawns. It felt wholesome, clean, the perfect place to hide a dirty secret. Using the address from the wire transfer, I found her street easily. It was a quiet, tree-lined cul-de-sac. I parked at the end of the road, my old sedan looking out of place among the newer SUVs and minivans. Her house was a modest but well-kept blue colonial. A child's bicycle lay on its side in the driveway. A family home. I sat there for what felt like hours, my knuckles white on the steering wheel, just watching. What was I expecting? A confrontation? I didn't have a plan. I just needed to see her. The woman who had a name in my wife's diary and a $65,000 payment in her bank account. Just after 3, a school bus rumbled to a stop at the corner. A few minutes later, the front door of the blue house opened. A woman with dark, curly hair, just as Eleanor had described, walked out onto the porch. It was her, Sophie. She was followed by a little boy, maybe 4 or 5 years old. He ran across the lawn and into her open arms. As she lifted him up, laughing, the sun caught the color of his hair. It was a familiar, sandy brown, Marcus's hair. I felt the air leave my lungs. A son. He had a son. This wasn't just an affair. This was a parallel life. The bicycle, the family home, the little boy with his father's hair. It was all real. My daughter wasn't just being cheated on. She was unknowingly competing with a whole other family, a family being funded by the sale of her own mother's legacy. The wire transfer wasn't a payoff to a mistress. It was child support. Or something more. I watched as they went back inside, the happy domestic scene a brutal contrast to the silent grieving house I would return to. The betrayal was so much deeper, so much more devastating than I could have ever imagined. He had a child with another woman, a child who was now being cared for with money that should have been part of Clara's future. I drove away from that street in a daze, my mind struggling to assemble the horrifying pieces. He had met Sophie years ago. He had a child with her, and for the entire duration of his marriage to my daughter, he had been living a lie, juggling two families, two lives. How had he managed it? How had no one known? When I got home, I went straight to my study. I needed more than just a visual confirmation. I needed hard proof. I started digging online, using the new information I had. Sophie Dubois, Northwood. I searched public records, property deeds, and then I found it. A deed for the Blue Colonial purchased 5 years ago, the same year Marcus and Clara got married. The owners were listed as Marcus Thorne and Sophie Thorne. Thorne, not Dubois. She used her maiden name for the wire transfer, a deliberate act of concealment. But on the official documents for their shared property, she was his wife. Or at least she presented as such. He hadn't just bought her a house, he had put his own name on it. He had legally and financially tied himself to her in a way that went far beyond secret child support payments. Driven by a grim certainty, I did one more search. I pulled up the photos from Clara's wedding. I scanned the smiling faces of the guests, the groomsmen, the bridesmaids. And then I saw him, standing right next to Marcus, beaming like a proud brother. David Chen, the best man. I remembered him vaguely. Charming, funny, Marcus's oldest friend from college. On a hunch, I searched his name, connecting it with Northwood. I found his professional page for a local accounting firm, and then a link to a community newspaper, the Northwood Gazette, an article from 3 years ago about a charity fun run. The photo was grainy, but the faces were clear. There was Marcus, standing next to Sophie, and on her other side, giving a thumbs up to the camera, was David Chen. The best man, the trusted friend. He knew. He had to have known. He stood at that altar and watched Marcus promise a life of fidelity to my daughter, knowing the entire thing was a sham. He was an accomplice, a willing participant in the grand deception. This wasn't just Marcus's lie, it was a conspiracy. My hands were shaking as I pushed away from the desk. Marcus hadn't just built a secret life, he had built a fortress of lies, with his best friend standing guard. He thought he was untouchable. He thought the old watchmaker in the basement was too lost in his grief to ever notice the gears grinding away in the wrong direction. He was wrong. I wasn't just going to expose him. I was going to dismantle his entire world, screw by screw, lie by lie. And I knew exactly where I would do it. My phone buzzed with a calendar notification. Clara and Marcus's 5th anniversary party. The perfect stage for the final act.
I now had the house, the son, and the accomplice. But I was missing the final, undeniable piece of proof. I needed the boy's birth certificate. I knew a man, a private investigator, who owed me a favor, who operated in the moral gray areas I'd spent my life avoiding. As I was about to call him, my gaze fell on my wife's diary again. I picked it up, and a small folded piece of paper fell out from between the pages. It was a hospital bill for Sophie Dubois, dated 5 years ago, for a maternity ward stay at Northwood Regional Hospital. Eleanor hadn't just met her, she had paid for the birth of her husband's secret child. The hospital bill was a document of impossible betrayal. My wife, in her boundless, unsuspecting kindness, had paid for the birth of her own daughter's marital destruction. The bill was dated just 3 months before Marcus and Clara's wedding. He had been planning his new life with my daughter while his secret son was being born. and he had used my wife's generosity as a financial shield. He hadn't just deceived Eleanor, he had made her an unwitting accomplice in his grand lie. The cruelty of it was bottomless. Any shred of sympathy I might have had, any thought that he was simply a weak man trapped by circumstance, evaporated in that moment. This was not weakness. This was pure, calculated evil. The bill, however, was also a gift. It contained the exact date of birth for the child and the hospital. It was the key I needed. I called the private investigator, a man named Sal, who I'd helped out of a legal jam years ago by proving his antique pocket watch, his one family heirloom, had been tampered with by an unscrupulous dealer. He owed me. "Sal, it's Arthur Woods," I said, my voice flat. "Arthur, long time. What's tickin'? Or rather, what's not?" "I need a document," I said, cutting to the chase. "A birth certificate. Northwood Regional Hospital. Date of birth is May 14th, 5 years ago. Mother's name is Sophie Dubois. I need to know the name on the father's line. And I need it yesterday." There was a pause. "That's a big ask, Arthur. That's digging deep into sealed records." "You owe me, Sal," I said quietly. "And this is more important than a pocket watch." He sighed. "All right, for you. But it'll be messy, and it'll cost you." "I'll pay whatever it takes," I said, the irony not lost on me. I was about to spend my own money to uncover a truth that had been funded by my wife's stolen legacy. While I waited for Sal's call, I began to prepare. The anniversary party was in 10 days. It was to be a grand affair at a lavish downtown ballroom, a testament to the success Marcus had so carefully fabricated. It was his stage, and I was going to use it to burn his performance to the ground. I began assembling my evidence like a prosecutor preparing for trial. I made high-quality prints of the property deed. I found a clear digital copy of the Northwood Gazette photo and blew it up. I printed the wedding photo of Marcus and his best man, David, their smiles a monument to their shared deceit. I printed copies of the wire transfer receipts, highlighting the dates and the name Sophie Dubois. Each document was a gear in the machine of his downfall. I mounted them on black cardstock, creating a stark visual narrative of his lies. I then went to my workshop and found a beautiful handcrafted rosewood box I'd made years ago. It was meant to hold a special set of tools, but this felt like a more fitting purpose. I placed the documents inside, one by one. This box would not hold tools of creation, but tools of destruction. 2 days later, Sal called back. "You're not going to believe this, Arthur," he said, his voice a mixture of professional thrill and genuine shock. "I got it. The certificate. The kid's name is Leo Dubois. Mother, Sophie Dubois. And the father, you sitting down? Just tell me, Sal. Marcus Thorne. It's right there in black and white. He signed it himself." The final piece clicked into place. I had it. Irrefutable, undeniable proof. I asked Sal to send me a certified copy overnight. When it arrived, I placed it on top of the other documents in the rosewood box. My case was complete. The days leading up to the party were a surreal performance. Clara called me daily, bubbling with excitement. She talked about her dress, the flowers, the special surprise Marcus had promised her. "He says it's something that will change our lives forever, Dad. I think he's finally bought our dream house." Each word was a tiny, sharp jab to my heart. She was flying so high, completely unaware of the fall that was coming. I played my part, the supportive father, offering quiet words of encouragement. The deception felt foul in my mouth, but it was necessary. To expose a liar, I had to become one myself, just for a little while. The night of the party, I dressed in my best suit, the one I'd worn to my wife's funeral. It felt appropriate. I was attending another kind of death, the death of my daughter's marriage. I picked up the rosewood box. It felt heavy, not with the weight of the paper inside, but with the weight of the truth it contained. I arrived at the ballroom and was immediately struck by the scene. It was a monument to Marcus's lies. Crystal chandeliers dripped from the ceiling. A string quartet played softly in the corner. 200 guests, the city's financial elite, mingled sipping champagne. And in the center of it all were Clara and Marcus. She was breathtaking in a silver gown, her face glowing. He was the picture of success and adoration, his hand never leaving her side. He was king of a castle built on sand, and I was the coming tide. He saw me and strode over, a wide, confident smile on his face. "Arthur, glad you could make it. You look sharp." He clapped me on the shoulder. The casual, friendly gesture made my skin crawl. "Wouldn't miss it for the world, Marcus," I said, my voice even. He glanced at the box in my hands. "A gift? You shouldn't have." "Oh, it's a gift, all right," I said, a cold smile touching my lips. "It's something you'll both remember for the rest of your lives." He laughed, oblivious, and was pulled away by a colleague. I found a quiet table in the back and sat down, placing the box in front of me. I watched them for the next hour, the happy couple, the picture of love and success. They were dancing now, a slow, romantic waltz. Clara rested her head on his shoulder, a look of perfect contentment on her face. It was the last moment of her innocence, and I, her father, was about to be the one to destroy it. I felt a pang of profound sorrow, but it was overshadowed by a grim, unshakable resolve. This was the only way. The rot had to be cut out, no matter how painful the surgery. The music faded, and Marcus led Clara to a small stage at the front of the room, taking a microphone. "Friends, family," he began, his voice booming with false sincerity. "Thank you for celebrating 5 wonderful years with us." He paused, looking down at my daughter with tears in his eyes. "Tonight, I have a confession to make, a secret I've been keeping, one that will change our lives forever." The room fell silent, and my heart stopped. He was going to do it himself. He was going to try and control the narrative. But he had no idea that I had a confession of my own to share. A hush fell over the ballroom. Marcus held the microphone like a scepter, the master of ceremonies in his own tragedy. I could see his strategy unfolding with horrifying clarity. He was going to confess, but he was going to do it his way. He would frame himself as a tormented soul, a father forced to make impossible choices. He would play on their sympathy, on Clara's boundless capacity for forgiveness. He would turn his ultimate betrayal into a story of love and sacrifice. He was hijacking the truth, sanitizing it for public consumption. My blood ran hot. I would not let him. I would not let him poison the truth with his self-serving pity party. "For a long time," Marcus continued, his voice thick with rehearsed emotion, "I have been carrying a heavy burden, a secret from a life before Clara, a life that resulted in a beautiful, wonderful child, a son." Gasps and murmurs spread through the crowd like wildfire. I saw Clara's hand fly to her mouth, her eyes wide with shock. She was looking at him as if for the first time. But this was not the whole story. This was the curated version. "My son, Leo, is a fighter," Marcus said, his voice cracking. "But he's sick. He's been battling a rare form of cancer, and the costs of his treatment have been overwhelming. I kept this from Clara because I was ashamed. I was afraid. I didn't want to burden her with my past." He turned to her, tears streaming down his face. "My love, can you ever forgive me? I did it all to protect you, but now I need you. Leo needs you. His last hope is an experimental treatment, and I can't fund it alone." It was a masterpiece of manipulation. In the space of 60 seconds, he had transformed himself from a cheating husband into a tragic, heroic father. He had turned his secret into a noble burden, his financial deception into a desperate act of love. I looked around the room and saw faces softening, expressions of shock turning into ones of sympathy. He was winning. But his performance was based on a flawed premise. He thought he was the only one who knew the whole story. As the sympathetic murmurs grew, I stood up from my table. I picked up the rosewood box and began to walk toward the stage. My steps were slow, deliberate, each one echoing in the sudden silence that fell as all eyes turned to me. The sea of guests parted before me. Marcus's voice faltered as he saw me approaching, a look of pure, unadulterated panic flashing across his face. He knew. In that instant, he knew that his carefully constructed narrative was about to be obliterated. "Dad," Clara whispered, her voice trembling. I reached the stage and stepped up beside them without a word. I gently took the microphone from Marcus's limp, unresisting hand. His skin was cold and clammy. "That was a very moving story, Marcus," I said, my voice calm and clear, amplified throughout the silent ballroom. "A story of a father's love, of shame, of impossible choices. It's a good story, but it's not the true one." I turned to face the crowd, my gaze sweeping over their confused and curious faces. You see, Marcus left out a few key details. His story isn't about a burden he carried alone. It's about a conspiracy of lies he built with the help of others. My eyes found David Chen in the crowd, his face pale as a sheet. It's a story of theft, and it's a story of cruelty that began long before he ever met my daughter. I opened the rosewood box. The sound of the latch clicking open was like a gunshot in the silent room. Marcus would have you believe he kept his son a secret out of shame. The truth is, he kept him a secret because he was busy building a new life, a more profitable one, with my daughter. I pulled out the property deed. This is the deed to the house he shares with his son, Sophie, a house he purchased the same year he married Clara. His name is right there, next to hers. I held it up for all to see. The murmurs started again, but this time they were laced with confusion and suspicion. "He would have you believe he struggled alone to pay for his son's care," I continued, my voice gaining strength. "The truth is, he paid for it by systematically draining my daughter's finances. And when that wasn't enough, he came for her mother's memory." I looked at Clara, my heart aching at the pain I was causing, but knowing it was a necessary surgery. "He convinced you your mother's engagement ring was a lazy asset. He stole it from my safe and sold it, not for Leo's treatment. He sold that ring a year ago, sweetheart. He sold it to pay off debts related to his secret life." Clara swayed on her feet, her face ashen. Her bridesmaids rushed to her side, holding her steady. "But the greatest lie," I said, my voice dropping to a low, furious whisper, "is the one I told about my wife." I pulled out the hospital bill from Eleanor's diary. Marcus didn't just meet Sophie. He brought her into my home. He introduced her to my wife. And when Sophie gave birth to his son, it was my wife, Eleanor, in her infinite kindness, who paid the hospital bill, never knowing she was funding her own daughter's future heartbreak. The collective gasp from the crowd was sharp and visceral. This was a sin beyond infidelity, beyond financial deceit. This was a violation of the sacred. "He didn't tell you about his son because he was ashamed," I said, my eyes boring into Marcus. He didn't tell you because he is a parasite. A man who attaches himself to good, kind women and drains them of their money, their spirit, and their love. He used my dying wife's generosity to pay for the birth of his secret child. And then he used my grieving daughter's inheritance to support him. And tonight he was going to use the tragedy of his sick son to complete the job and bleed her dry. I took out the final document, the birth certificate. This is not a tragic hero. This is a monster. And I will not stand by and watch him destroy another woman I love. I let the birth certificate fall from my fingers. It fluttered to the stage, landing at Clara's feet. She looked down at him, then up at the man she had called her husband for 5 years. The love in her eyes was gone, replaced by a look of utter, soul-shattering revulsion. The illusion was broken. The fairy tale was over, and all that was left was the ugly, brutal truth, exposed for all the world to see. Marcus, his face a mask of primal terror, turned and fled. He literally ran from the stage, pushing through the stunned guests like a coward abandoning a sinking ship. But as the crowd erupted in a chaos of shouts and whispers, I saw one person who wasn't shocked. It was Marcus's father, a quiet, stern man I barely knew, who was now walking purposefully towards me, his face not angry, but filled with a look of grim, heartbreaking recognition. The ballroom was in chaos. Guests were swarming around Clara, their faces a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. Marcus's business partners were whispering frantically into their phones, no doubt trying to get ahead of the social and financial fallout. Amid the turmoil, the steady approach of William Thorne, Marcus's father, felt like the calm eye of a storm. He was a man I'd only met a handful of times, always polite but distant, a retired engineer who seemed worlds away from his son's flashy financial career. I expected anger, accusations, a defense of his son. I was wrong. He stopped in front of me. His eyes, a clear, sharp blue, were filled with a profound and weary sadness. He completely ignored the scene unfolding around Clara and looked at the scattered documents on the stage. "So, this is it," he said, his voice quiet but carrying a weight of finality. "This is what he's become?" I was speechless. "You knew?" "I didn't know the details," William said, shaking his head slowly. "Not about your wife. God rest her soul. That is a monstrous new low. But I knew something was wrong. I raised my son to understand the mechanics of things, to respect integrity and precision. But he only ever learned the mechanics of the deal, the art of the sale. He lost his moral compass years ago." He bent down and picked up the copy of the property deed, his hand surprisingly steady. "I've been sending money to Sophie myself for the past year, anonymously." The confession stunned me into silence. "I found out about Leo by accident," he explained, his gaze distant. "A piece of misdirected mail. I confronted Marcus. He gave me the same story he was about to give all of you, that it was a mistake from his past, that he was trying to do the right thing by the boy. He begged me not to tell Clara, said it would destroy her. He used her as a shield." William's laugh was bitter and dry. "I gave him an ultimatum. Tell her the truth yourself within 1 year, or I will. I started sending money to Sophie, not for him, but for my grandson. I couldn't let the boy suffer for his father's sins." He looked at me, a flicker of something that looked like respect in his eyes. "His year was up next month. You just beat me to it. And you did it in a way I never could have. You dismantled him. You took his machine apart and showed everyone how rotten the gears were." Our conversation was interrupted as David Chen, Marcus's best man, tried to slip past us and out of the ballroom. William's arm shot out, grabbing his sleeve with surprising strength. "And where do you think you're going, David?" William's voice was like ice. David froze, his face pale and sweating. "William, I had nothing to do with this." "The hell you didn't," William snarled, his composure finally breaking, revealing a core of pure steel. "You stood at that altar. You've been his friend for 20 years. You watched him do all of this, and you said nothing. You're just as guilty as he is." He released David's arm with a shove. "Get out of my sight, and pray my son's business partners have a shred of decency, because your accounting firm is about to lose every single client that matters in this city. I'll see to it personally." David scurried away like a rat. William turned back to me, the fire in his eyes banking back into a sad glow. "My grandson, Leo," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "He's a good boy. He doesn't deserve any of this. The treatment, is it real?" "I believe so," I said, the anger inside me giving way to a shared, terrible sorrow. We were two grandfathers, connected by a tragedy we had no part in creating. "The money Marcus stole from you, from your daughter," William said, his jaw tight, "I will pay it back, every last cent. It may take me some time, but you have my word as a man." "That's not your debt to pay, William," I said. "Yes, it is," he insisted. "It's my family's debt, my name. He has shamed it, but I will not let him destroy it." By now, Clara's bridesmaids had managed to guide her through the gawking crowd and toward a side exit. She was walking, but she looked like a sleepwalker, her eyes vacant and unseeing. I knew I had to go to her. "Thank you, William," I said, extending my hand. He shook it, his grip firm. It was a strange, silent alliance. Two fathers on opposite sides of a war, now standing together in the wreckage. I made my way to Clara, the guests parting before me with a mixture of fear and respect. I put my arm around her shoulder, and she leaned into me, her body trembling. "Let's go home, sweetheart," I whispered. As I led her out of the ballroom, away from the ruins of her marriage, I felt a profound sense of closure, but no victory. I had exposed the truth. I had served justice. But the cost was my own daughter's heart, shattered into a million pieces on a ballroom floor. I had taken apart the broken clock of her life, and now came the hardest part, trying to put it back together again. We walked out into the cool night air, leaving the noise and the lies behind us, two survivors walking away from a shipwreck. The silence in the car on the way home was the sound of a life ending, and the terrifying, uncertain quiet of whatever was to come next.
6 months passed in a quiet rhythm of healing. Clara began to smile again, volunteering at a local arts center and rediscovering a passion she'd long abandoned for Marcus. One rainy afternoon, she came home with a tarnished silver music box from a flea market. "It's broken," she said, placing it on my workshop bench, "but I thought maybe you could fix it." As I opened the casing, I saw something hidden beneath the mainspring, a tiny inscription etched into the base. "Property of W. Thorne." A call to William Thorne confirmed what I suspected. It was a gift from his late wife, lost 30 years ago when Marcus had carelessly disposed of her belongings. It played her favorite tune, he'd said, his voice thick with emotion. Restoring the intricate mechanism was a form of therapy. I wasn't just mending gears, I was mending a piece of a stranger's broken heart. Clara sat with me in the workshop, her quiet presence a comfort. The solitary space of my grief had become a place of connection. When it was finished, William drove down himself. He looked older,
the lines on his face etched deeper by sorrow. I lifted the music box lid, and a delicate, heartbreakingly sad melody filled the room. William closed his eyes, a single tear tracing a path down his cheek. "Her song," he whispered. He told us Leo was in remission, that he and Sophie were making a new life for themselves. Marcus was gone from their lives, a ghost who only paid child support. Looking at my daughter, William's voice was full of a deep paternal regret. "Clara, I am so sorry for what my son put you through." Clara gave him a small, sad smile. "It wasn't your fault, William." After he left, the house was filled with a comfortable peace. "The Art Center is looking for someone to teach a jewelry repair class," Clara said, placing her hand on mine. "I told them about you." I looked at my daughter and saw the same resilience that had belonged to her mother. The haunted look was gone, replaced by a quiet strength. "I might like that," I said, a genuine smile spreading across my face for the first time in what felt like a lifetime. The next day, I took the silver locket that Sophie had returned. I carefully opened the tiny frame and removed the old photo of the young, foolishly grinning boy I used to be. I replaced it with a tiny picture I had taken just that morning. Clara, standing in the garden among her mother's roses, her face turned toward the sun, a small, beautiful smile on her lips. I clicked the locket shut. The story of my past was now complete, and a new one, the story of my daughter's future, was just beginning. And I knew, with a watchmaker's certainty, that this time it would be built to last.